before we dive into the darkness, remember, stories like this don't end when the screen goes black. If you think you're ready to walk into the shadows of Australia's silent bushland, subscribe, stay curious, and don't look away when the truth starts to hurt. It began with dust. Fine red dust blowing across an empty highway that cut through miles of eucalyptus and scrub like a scar. At 6:42 a.m., a truck driver radioed a concern that didn't sound dramatic at first. A white Uda, doors open, engine running. Hazard lights blinking like tired eyes in the rising sun. No one in sight. No movement in the nearby clearing. Just that eerie stillness the Australian countryside gets when heat is coming and birds haven't yet decided to sing. The location was a few kilometers outside the small town of Warringah Downs, a place where everyone knows everyone else's middle name, and gossip travels faster than wind over dry grass. Police arrived by 7:10 a.m., expecting a breakdown. They did not expect what they found. The Uda belonged to the Bushland family. Daniel, a quiet contractor known for repairing fences across distant properties. His wife, Mara, a teacher who ran the town's weekend reading group. And their two children, 12-year-old Ella and 9-year-old Jonah. Their phones were still inside the car. Ella's backpack was on the back seat, unzipped, one book half slid out. A coffee cup in the holder was still warm, but there were no footprints leading away. Only tire tracks that ended where the car stopped, then confusion in the dirt, as if someone had brushed the ground clean in broad strokes. Officers swept the immediate bushland first. They called out names. They listened. Wind rushed through trees and rattled thin metal on a nearby gate. That was all. No answers. No birdsong. No family. Within hours, the town knew. By noon, the country did. The investigation began the way they always do, with circles radiating outward from the last known location. Neighbors were questioned. CCTV from the single service station in town was pulled. What they found on the footage unsettled everyone who watched it. At 6:01 a.m., the Bushland family car passed by slowly. Daniel was driving. Mara stared forward, not turning to the attendant waving casually at the window. Ella and Jonah were in the back, silhouettes shifting as if arguing or playing. Nothing seemed wrong, except for one thing. Daniel never stopped for fuel, even though records showed his tank was nearly empty. He drove past, as if following a route that didn't allow time for hesitation. 2 detectives were assigned to lead the case. Senior Constable Leah Mercer, who had grown up in a mining town not far away and carried that dry toughness in how she spoke, and Detective Sergeant Tom Kearney, careful, deliberate, the kind of investigator who trusted what silence revealed. They drove the same road that afternoon, sunlight harsh and white on the bonnet, and found themselves asking the same question the country would soon ask. Why would a stable, calm family vanish without a trace? The first clue wasn't a footprint or a fingerprint. It was a contradiction. In the Bushland home, nothing looked ransacked. There were no signs of forced entry. Breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The children's school forms were half filled out on the kitchen counter. But a suitcase was missing from the hall cupboard. Only one. And inside Daniel's office, neat, ordered, there was a gap in the row of folders. Something had been removed recently, leaving a faint, untouched outline in the thin layer of dust. Leah noticed something else. On the refrigerator door, among smiling photos and magnets shaped like kangaroos, was a printed email, just the first page. The bottom lines had been torn away. The subject read, "Confidential meeting terms." No signature, no sender, just the date circled in red. Yesterday. Interviews started that evening. Colleagues called Daniel reliable, boring in a good way, the last person to cause trouble. But one man hesitated just long enough to matter. A landowner on the edge of town admitted quietly that Daniel had been asking questions about boundaries and deeds, about land that changed hands quickly and quietly over the past year. He said someone was pushing him. The man murmured, said it was bigger than it looked. Mara's co-workers painted a different shade of worry. She had canceled her reading group suddenly the previous weekend. She had seemed distant. When pressed, she had said only, "We're sorting something out. It'll be fine soon." She hadn't sounded convinced. The search expanded. Drones scanned Bushland. Volunteers combed dry creek beds. Every minute that passed felt heavier. Then night fell, and with it, the first real crack in the calm surface of the town. Neighbors had mentioned an old shearer's shed on the Bushland's property, locked for years, used only for storage. Daniel never let anyone inside. Even family avoided it. It sat at the back of the land like a shadow with walls. Leah and Tom walked to it with torches cutting narrow cones through darkness. The padlock was newer than hinges, too new, gleaming against rust. They forced it open. The smell of dust and oil slid out first. Tools lined the walls. Old crates were stacked in neat towers. A workbench sat under a single hanging bulb. Tom clicked the light on. The bench wasn't empty. Laid out in careful rows were photographs, maps, and handwritten notes. Property lines marked and crossed out. Names underlined. Dates circled. And in the center, pinned like a centerpiece, was a single image of the Bushland family, smiling on their porch. Across the photo, in thick black marker, someone had written one word, deadline. The word deadline stared up at them like something alive. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a promise. Leah didn't speak at first. She simply took in the walls. Dozens of rural plots plotted out with thick red ink, arrows drawn between properties, names written without last names, as if whoever made the notes assumed they already knew who they meant. There was a rhythm to the markings, like a plan sketched over too many late nights. She leaned closer and noticed the edges of some papers were water-warped, as if they had been handled with sweating hands. Tom exhaled slowly. "This isn't storage," he said. "This is preparation." But preparation for what? They began photographing everything. Each note, each map, every scrawl phrase. Certain repeated words stood out. Tender, lease, transfer, pressure. This wasn't about fences and broken gates. This was about land, about something moving quietly through the countryside, buying pieces of it while most people were busy living their lives. Pinned near the maps was another photo, not of the Bushland family this time, but of a man in his 50s shaking hands with a suit-wearing stranger in front of a bulldozer. No names written there. Leah recognized the older man, local council figure, the type seen at ribbon cuttings and agricultural fairs. A second copy of that same photo lay underneath, but in this one the handshake was circled in red, like a wound. They found a notebook under the bench. The first pages were ordinary, lists of tools, reminders, measurements. Then the handwriting changed, rushed, slanted. Lines ran together. They said it was just paperwork. Mara told me to leave it. They know where we live. The final page had been torn out. The discovery shifted the case overnight. What had looked like a disappearance now looked like a collision. A quiet family caught in the path of something bigger, something organized. If Daniel had been asking questions, if he had pushed too far, if someone had felt threatened, then the disappearance wasn't random at all. It was deliberate. By morning, the town wasn't whispering anymore. It was buzzing, electric with fear. Shop doors stayed open longer. People spoke softer. Rumors spread fast and ugly. Secret deals outside developers. Farmers forced to sell. Threats left in mailboxes. Nobody would admit anything directly. Everyone acted like they hadn't seen enough to be sure. Leah and Tom focused on the email. Confidential meeting terms. Circled date. Yesterday. If a meeting had happened, someone had been there, someone had called it. They traced phone records, bank statements, work calendars, anything that could suggest movement. What surfaced wasn't loud, but it was strange. The Bushland's bank account showed no big withdrawals, but there were several small transactions in the weeks before they vanished. Fuel bought in remote towns, supplies purchased in places far from home, a pattern like someone preparing for distance. Then a surveillance camera in a roadside cafe 60 kilometers away offered the first flicker of movement. At 5:12 a.m., just before dawn, the Bushland Uda appeared in a blurred corner frame, not stopping, headed toward an area of open scrubland and private stations. Minutes later, a second car followed, dark, tinted, no plates visible. Whoever was in that second vehicle didn't want to be identified. They toured properties marked on Daniel's maps. Some owners welcomed them in, nervous but cooperative. Others shut gates and pretended not to be home, dogs barking while curtains shifted. One elderly woman said quietly through a fly screen, "He came here asking who was buying everything. I told him what I knew. I told him to be careful." He laughed a little, not the happy kind, more like he'd already decided something. The deeper they went, the less it felt like a missing persons case, and the more it felt like they were tugging on the hem of a curtain. Something was behind it, waiting, watching to see how much fabric they'd lift. That afternoon, forensic technicians finished combing the Bushland Uda. One result stopped the room. On the back seat, beneath the children's things, beneath stray crumbs and dust, they found traces of sedative residue. Not enough to confirm dosage. Enough to confirm intent. Someone hadn't just taken the bushlands. Someone had prepared to take them. The timeline contracted sharply. The family had been conscious at the service station. At some point after that, something changed, and the person who brought that change had been close enough to touch them. Leah stared at the sedative report long after the others put it down. She kept hearing Mara's co-workers saying she looked distant, tired, somewhere else entirely. The residue raised the most uncomfortable question of all, the one nobody ever wants to ask in cases like this. Had someone inside the family known what was coming? Before the day ended, another thread snapped tight. The council figure from the photograph agreed to an interview. He sat straight-backed, polite, the kind of careful that comes from years of public meetings. He denied knowing anything beyond routine development. He never used the word pressure. Not once. But as he left, he paused just slightly too long at the door and said, "If you're looking for who's really moving things around here, you won't find them in town records." That night, wind sucked hard against the windows of the station. Files lay open across the table. Photos of the Bushland kids, smiling, were mixed with stark images of empty roads and endless bush. Tom's phone buzzed. The message had no number attached. No greeting. Just 5 words. "Stop looking. You're too late." The message, "Stop looking. You're too late," didn't just sting. It rearranged the room. Silence grew heavy. It suggested 2 things at once. That someone was watching and that the case had crossed an invisible line. Leah traced the phrasing again and again, the way investigators do when words feel like footprints. Not a threat. A conclusion. Whoever sent it believed they controlled the timeline. That meant confidence. That meant proximity. By morning, a decision was made. They would stop letting the case dictate direction. They would force it to move. They returned to the map spread across the shearer's shed wall. Not every circle mattered equally. Some were darker, pressed in with more pressure, as if the pen point had nearly broken through the page. One area repeated over and over, a stretch of land beyond public roads, bordered by long quiet station holdings and a recently registered private company few locals recognized. A name appeared in Daniel's notes beside it, not a person, but an entity, Southridge Consolidation. Corporate records revealed a lattice of shell owners and post office boxes. Nothing obvious. Nothing proud. Yet everything pointed to that one remote property, a place large enough to hide movement and small enough to avoid attention. It had been purchased in pieces, discreetly, the way someone pulls a puzzle together without showing the box lid. A warrant took time. Too much time. So they began with what they could. Aerial surveys noted new structures where old maps showed bare land. Long sheds. Fresh fencing. A recently graded track cutting through scrub in a straight, unnatural line. The drive out there took hours. The road narrowed. The landscape widened, stretching into pale horizon. Eucalyptus leaned like tired sentinels. Dust followed behind the vehicle in a long, ghostly ribbon. Halfway in, they found the first sign that the message hadn't been bluff. A burnt patch of earth sat beside a dry creek bed. Not a wildfire, not random. Controlled, contained. Ash held the shape of something once organized. Papers, cardboard, maybe plastic bins. Leah knelt beside the circle of black and lifted fragments with tweezers. Edges of documents. Melted rings that might have been folder clips. Someone had been cleaning their past. The air felt thinner. They reached the boundary fence of the Southridge property just before dusk. The place didn't look abandoned. It looked managed. A lock gate, new chain. a sign warning against trespass, a security camera that pretended not to notice them but stared directly. With proper authorization finally in hand, they entered. The shed smelled of soil, oil, and logistics. Equipment sat in ordered rows, perfectly legal on its own. But beside the machinery were pallets of packed boxes with destination codes that didn't match any nearby town. Paperwork rested on a desk, too neat as if staged. The recent burn scars they saw earlier explained the thinness of what remained. Behind the largest shed, a narrow path led down toward a dry dam. That was where they saw it. Faint tracks leading to a stand of trees and the imprint of a vehicle that had come and gone repeatedly. Tom followed the indentations down the slope. While Leah scanned the tree line, he stopped first. Tucked back from view was a smaller building, half buried in earth, more bunker than shed. Its door was steel scraped, recently used. A padlock hung open on one hinge, as if someone had left in a hurry or intended to return soon. Inside, the temperature dropped. There were chairs, a table, empty water bottles, the stale echo of occupation. On the wall, taped in quiet rows, were copies of surveys and land offers, letters typed and signed, phone numbers without names. A radio sat in the corner, switched off but warm, as if recently used. And there at the center were 4 bracelets. 2 large, 2 small. No blood, no bodies, nothing grotesque. Just the unmistakable intimacy of objects worn every day, scuffed edges, familiar patterns. Things people take off only when asked to or when they cannot choose. Leah felt it before she spoke it. They were here. Evidence built itself without theatrics. Fiber traces matched the Bushland home. Footprints in the dust layered over one another, recent and hurried, some smaller than others. The bunker told a story of containment, of waiting, and of movement at the last possible moment. A vehicle approached then, headlights cresting the rise, engine low and controlled. For a heartbeat, time slowed to a wire-thin line. The car paused when it saw them, as if weighing distance and consequence. Then it turned sharply and fled along the far track. Before they could block it, the chase carved through twilight, tires kicking gravel, radios sparking to life. But the land knew more turns than they did. The vehicle vanished into the dark, swallowed by country that keeps its secrets. They returned to the bunker with a heavier understanding. Whoever orchestrated this didn't just want land. They wanted silence. The Bushlands had become leverage in a transaction that never wanted daylight. The break came from a place neither dramatic nor cinematic, a paper ledger overlooked beneath a stack of forms. It held initials beside payment amounts and dates. Patterns emerged. Meetings, transfers, and a name written in full only once, hurriedly, then scribbled over but not enough to erase. A familiar name. Someone who had sat in town meetings. Someone who had shaken hands in photographs. Someone who had told them, politely, that real answers weren't in public records. He wasn't the whole machine, but he was the door to it. Confrontation didn't happen under flashing lights. It happened in a quiet office at dusk, blinds half closed. His calm didn't crack immediately. It fractured slowly, under the weight of maps, messages, and the image of her bracelets lying on a table no family had chosen. He spoke carefully at first, then with tired honesty slipped around the edges of guilt. There had been pressure. There had been money. There had been relocation, a word he used like a shield. He said he'd been told the family would be looked after. He never asked by whom. The Bushlands, he finally admitted, had refused to sign. That refusal had made them a problem. The larger operation behind him, investors offshore, intermediaries nameless by design, had already moved the family beyond reach before he realized the line had been crossed. The phrase, "you're too late," wasn't a threat. It was logistics. An international transfer trail, ended in bureaucracy and sealed records. Legality wrapped around immorality, like ribbon around stone. The official story, the one that appeared in print, would talk about irregularities, ongoing inquiries, and matters referred to federal authorities. The unofficial truth stayed in the room with Leah and Tom. A family vanished because they stood in the way of quiet expansion. A countryside changed shape, while people were busy trusting it would always look the same. Months later, Warringah Downs looked normal again. Children biked down the same streets. The service station attendant waved at passing cars. Bushland dust still rose red in the morning light. But on the back wall of the station, behind clipped reports and faded photographs, for bracelets remained in an evidence bag, not for spectacle, but because absence needs an anchor. The case was marked open. And sometimes late at night, when a message tone breaks the dark in Leah's quiet kitchen, she still half expects those 5 words to appear again. Stop looking. You're too late. If you think the truth ends there, it doesn't. Stories like this don't finish. They echo